Good afternoon, everyone. If you're on the European time zone, that is, I'm saying good afternoon. It might be good morning. It might be good evening. I can see some attendees joining. So a very warm welcome to all of you. As you join us today, do let us know in the chat where you're joining from. I'm sat here in London today as your host, but my esteemed panel, I know we're all in three different locations. We'll come on to that in just a minute. So yeah, do let us know in the chat where you're joining from today. Let's get a bit of a conversation going if we can. Always nice to see that. I can see our attendee numbers. There we go. Antonia, you've told us where you're. We've got Retford, Middlesbrough, uh, London, Birmingham. Great. So it looks like it is snowy Cologne. That's you, Sven. That's good. Looks like we've got lots of people on a good afternoon time zone anyway, which is good because predominantly we are going to be looking at this from a UK perspective, although Sven will also bring us a broader perspective, more on that in just a minute. I can see our attendee numbers building up, so I'm going to give it just another minute before we jump into our introductions on today's discussion. And I do, for those of you that are already here waiting, thanks for joining. Thanks for letting us know. We have Philadelphia. There we go. Amanda, you're our furthest afield, furthest away attendee, at least from where our panel is. You're very welcome. So good morning to
Good
you.
morning. Yes.
Good afternoon to everybody else. The good news I wanted to share is there are no slides today. So I hope that's good news. It really is a conversation, as if you're sitting in our virtual living room. And we're a couple of minutes in, and I can already see we've got well over 50 attendees on the call, and it's over 60 now, counting up. So I'm going to kick off for all of you that have joined. And if you join us just after, then you won't even hear me say this. So a very, very warm welcome, mostly good afternoon, with the exception of one good morning to all of you joining us on this webinar. We're here today to discuss how the landscape of payroll, particularly in the UK, is changing. Specifically thinking about that move from a kind of manual and error-prone process to one that really benefits HR, payroll, and employees in equal measure. So we're going to look at things like the challenges that we face currently today. Who are the key players in the process and how are they working together? As well as looking at the how and the why we may make changes to the way we're doing things in the future. And luckily, it's not me having to deliver this on my own. I will say a brief introduction though before I start, because I do have quite a strong interface with payroll myself. So my name's Toby Huff. I'm the Senior Director of People and Culture for Europe at HiBob. So for those of you that don't know HiBob, we are an HR platform, an HR IS. We work with some amazing modern and multinational businesses around the globe. My role within the company is that I work in our HR team. I lead our people team for Europe. So I'm working in an HR team in a business where everybody is somehow expert in all things HR, including, of course, that vital interface with payroll. So I look after about 350 bobbers across 5 different countries, but that is growing, and we run about 6 different payrolls together with our payroll team. So something that I'm very involved in along with my team. Based here in London, my pronouns are he, him, and here with HiBob. So before I go any further, I'd love to introduce our wonderful panelists as well. And I'm going to go furthest away from where I am. So that's to you, Sven. Perhaps you would introduce yourselves to our wonderful audience today.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. You will be able to tell where I'm from by my accent. So hello from Cologne in Germany. I work for Fosway. I'm the head of the analyst services, but also the lead analyst for HCM. Fosway Group is Europe's #1 HR industry analyst. So we look at, a lot of the vendors in the market, work with a lot of corporates and buyers, helping them make those buying decisions HR technologies choices, and strategic HR decisions as well. I'm located near Cologne in Düsseldorf. It is snowing today, and it looks as if it is going to stick. So my daughter's probably going to have fun in the garden already, building a snowman. And my pronouns in German, I will spare you. It's he and him, but in German it's er and seine, if that is of interest to anyone. And looking forward to this very much. And probably over to you, Simon.
Great, Sven, thank you very much. So, yes, I guess to round off the panel there, Simon Davis, I'm Director of Professional Services at HiBob. My pronouns are he, him. My role at HiBob is I oversee our implementation teams. I've been working with sort of payroll for pretty much my whole career, though. Actually, my first role before I moved into implementation was actually as a HR and payroll officer there as well. And I guess the payroll stuck with me ever since throughout my journey there. So very excited to be here today on this panel. Usually I would call in from Manchester, which is my home, but today I am on to be in I guess sunny but cold Surrey there in the south of the UK. So a pleasure to be here with you all.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sven, and thank you, Simon. So between the three of us, we each bring a different perspective to this payroll discussion. We've got a real bona fide industry expert in Sven. We've got Simon, who's working with a whole range of HiBob clients that are dealing with payroll challenges day in, day out, and also brings experience from previous organizations. And then you've got me looking at it from one of those internal interfaces point of view as well, from the HR angle. So with everybody introduced, we're going to kick off with our discussion. And the first thing to say then is payroll is a long process. There are multiple stages to it that we all know. And actually, to kickstart our discussion, I do want to dive into those different stages. Really looking at the beginning, the middle, and the end. Like any good story, we're going to do it that way. But before we double click on the beginning, middle, end, I do want to just do a little bit of a zoom out across the whole process and think about any of those overarching challenges. And I'd like to start with you, Sven. When you think about the overall challenges that we currently see with payroll, let's start there. Love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, overall challenges in payroll. It's an area, like if I step back to my 20 odd years career in HR and later on the vendor side, payroll has been an area that has never seen a lot of innovation, to be honest. We are still on this, almost paradigm from the last century where we had all of this batch processing. You're always kind of still thinking IBM. And so what we saw, obviously, was with the pandemic, a new appreciation for the payroll function. You really then appreciated to receive the paycheck when everybody was in lockdown. And it was about at that time where the vendors had already started to innovate quite significantly on it. So for the past few years now, we've been speaking about a lot of innovation going on in the payroll system space. It's probably one of the most innovative areas now within HCM. And that is a strong statement from me, right? There's skills and recruitment and, all these areas of innovation. But payroll is actually one that is getting a lot of innovation currently. And the US probably was leading the bunch. Hello to our friends in Pennsylvania. You're probably 2-3 years ahead of all of us over here in Europe, at least ahead of the UK. And then the UK again is ahead 2-3 years before mainland Europe. So Germany still a bit behind, France a bit behind, and so on. And so a lot of those kind of challenges are being addressed by these new innovative systems. And obviously one of which is, these massive payroll windows where you need to almost stop everything else and have this huge peak of work at the end, close as you approach payday, everything is getting super hectic and everything. And under this new paradigm, it is all getting a bit more continuous. So I think of it as this annual performance review with maybe a mid-year review to being these one-on-one check-in meetings every other week or every other day between managers and employees, now coming to payroll as well and being a much more continuous process that is happening throughout the month as new joiners are starting, as promotions are happening, as salary increases are happening. So that takes off a lot of that spike at the end of the process. That would be my view. And as I said, US is probably ahead of the game. UK following relatively closely, and the rest of Europe probably still a little bit behind. But yeah, that would be my first start.
Thank you, Sven. Yeah, it's good to get that sort of bigger picture view there. Also, a few hints about some of the things that are coming down the line. And, spoiler alert, we're going to later on in this conversation really look a little bit, really double click on the future as we see it there. We mentioned earlier that we're going to break down the kind of beginning, middle, end of the process. I think, as panelists, let's focus for now on what some of the more traditional approaches and some of the challenges that brings. And I'm going to be cheeky and answer my own question here when we talk about the beginning of the process, because I mentioned earlier, my team here at HiBob looks after about 350 bobbers across 5 different payrolls that we run at the moment. One of them is UK. We have some other European sites as well that we run. One of the challenges when I think about the really traditional approach that we were following is just how early on in the month that process has to begin. We are a growing business, so hiring is critical. We're hiring every month of the year. And having this rigidity around when we can bring new starters into the business, very often driven by payroll, i.e. if they start too late in the month, then we can't include them in the payroll. That's not an ideal employee experience that we want to deliver from the outset. So, the rhythm of payroll is bleeding into other critical business processes. For us, one of those being recruitment. And the other challenge when you're managing multiple payrolls, but also UK as well, is just how many unique pieces of information that need to be captured. And actually, Sven, something you said earlier, which stuck with me is, businesses are getting better about kind of having this as an ongoing conversation. And, even in the traditional flow, that's something we've been really focusing on. How can we preempt the problems that we'll face at payday? Even if somebody joins, really nice point in the cycle, let's say someone joins on the 1st of the month, we might have a good sort of 2 or 3 weeks before we actually need everything from them. But let's just get it right from the beginning. Let's set the workflows up so that we're not chasing ourselves for critical payroll information after the fact and later down the line. But yeah, when I think about the first challenge, it's the beginning. The beginning of the process so early on in the month, and that causes problems particularly with hiring in a growing business. And the other challenge that we face with payroll at the beginning is that it doesn't matter what else we are doing, because those deadlines in the traditional approach are so important and so locked in. On the 15th of the month, this file is provided. On the 17th, it's validated. On the 19th, it's submitted, for example. My team, who are also business partners on the HR side, have to stop everything they're doing because payroll is the most important thing they're doing. Now, that can be really difficult sometimes because maybe we're dealing with a really tricky employee relations challenge. Maybe one of our team members has had a really difficult personal situation. To tell them that they have to wait, because if we don't deal with this now, an entire legal entity worth of folks won't get their salaries is a really challenging thing to say. And I find that rigidity around the traditional approach is really tough, actually. So there's a couple of thoughts from my side. But Simon, let me turn to you, because when you're talking to understanding with some of our customers in your past experience, their challenges, maybe you can bring us, thinking about challenges at the beginning of the process, in the traditional sense, and also kind of maybe as we move further down the line. What do you see?
Yeah, excellent. Actually, tell you what you said remind me when I used to work, say, in payroll myself, and we used to have my own leave cancelled or refused to be approved because it was a payroll sort of period there as well. So yeah, the
I'd
impact
forgotten
of
about
that
this,
sort of
Simon.
day.
Yeah, I can't. As soon as the team asks for time off, the first thing I'm thinking is this in payroll week? Because
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly is. It's sort of all-encompassing, that period where it's yeah, embodies everything you do. I think if you're a payroll professional in that period, but I think it really stems from, you look at, I guess, going towards that pay date. It tends to be a lot of back and forth, but it's quite time consuming in that way, really. Often the data we have to really impact payroll can sit in different areas around the business. So obviously you have something sitting in your maybe HR system in that way, which even integrated, I guess what we see with a lot of customers today is they're coming from maybe sending not a fully integrated solution there, but they have some form of like changes file that they sort of pull out of their system and then send to their payroll provider or payroll teams there to then manually key in to the payroll system. So today, particularly, I guess in the UK, we're seeing, that the HCM is the source of truth. That is where all the data sits. Promotions are put through there, salary changes are put through there, new starters, leavers. So that is where we're processing all the data, but it's not then transferring itself from the HCM system, the HR system, automatically through to the payroll system or connected in a very sort of easy way or transparent way. So we find that for a lot of customers, it's just that time of keying in sort of the information we hold already in one platform. And there tends to be a lot of back and forth of validation. Obviously, when you do things manually, it opens to risk and errors there, human nature, of course, involved in these. And I think maybe you got other things about other sources perhaps as well in there, whether or not overtime is put through your HR system or another source there. There's always sort of different elements there that can impact the payroll that need to be sort of pulled in to calculate to get to that sort of payroll date in advance. And particularly if you're doing batch process there, you've already got a 3-day window that you're sort of obliged to submit to anyway there as well. So I tend to find that businesses have this sort of payroll cut-off date, but it's rarely enforced as well. That you may say we need it by this date, but there's always this nuance of, well, we need this, or like you said, Toby, there's a new starter who really needs to get on the really important person to onboard, and we have to sort of accommodate all these things. And I think it just stems from, I'd say, inefficiency as an overall piece there that we've kind of become to accept in the payroll world as it's just the way it is there, and it's how we've always done it. So we'll keep sort of going this route.
This is what you were saying earlier, Sven, wasn't it? Around it's such an untouched area in many ways. Before the panel continues, I think this is time to bring in our attendees as well. So we're going to run a poll in just a second that should come up on your screens to ask you a couple of questions. There it is now. We'd like to understand at the moment, kind of, where are you with your payroll at the moment? Are you just sort of looking at getting started with it, with making some changes? Are you have you got a plan already that you're working on? It's great to see you already coming to answer those questions. That's brilliant. So keep those answers coming in. And whether you're just building the process out for the first time, whether you already know what you're doing, whether you're still working it out. And the other thing is, as we talk about our challenges and pain points, as we just have been, I'd love to see those come through in the chat as well. So do add into the chat any questions that you have. We have the Q&A, and I'm going to try and weave in your questions as we go through with our expert panel today. But also just love to get your comments on what we're discussing. So that's the other thing to ask there. So really great to see your answers there in the poll. We can see there that about 60% of you have got some kind of plan to make some changes to your payroll process, and actually you're working on that. About 20% of you working out what to do. So I think we can speak to that, and about 20% of you as well, really kind of exploring the options as well. So it's great to get a sense about what you're all working on there. Thank you for that. And Teresa, I can see you've raised your hand. We should have a Q&A option here on the bottom of your screen. So do go ahead and pop your question into there, and I'll keep an eye out for that when it comes up to ask the panel. What are your reflections on those results, Ben? Yeah, you've got something to add.
Yeah, no, obviously it's good to see where people are at. I think this helps us obviously frame and focus our conversation a little bit on that. But definitely, as you said, keep questions coming. We will be reading the chat throughout. I think that's we want to make it an interactive session as well. And Simon, to your earlier point about HCM systems, right? There is like this, great opportunity these systems provide around workflows, right? Where you can already early in the month get the corresponding approvals or notifications that other teams within the organization need about a new joiner coming in, them uploading the necessary documentation, even in the in the pre-boarding phase, potentially in the early days of the first week where they start, as they build out their network within the organization. This is now all happening in a digital world mostly, right? So that is where these solutions actually bring a lot of value already. Even we are not talking about payroll yet, but all the other processes that coincide with it, or bank account details change or whatever, right? So this is something that you can also, with most HCMs and with HiBob, I'm sure, definitely cover off as well, right? To say, okay, my bank account details have changed, and then there's a bit of a notification or approval process so that everybody who needs to know gets that information, when it occurs, and not, 3 different versions of Excel files and everything is mismatching and all of that kind of these shenanigans, right? So I think this is where a solid strategy between the systems can help. And what we are definitely seeing in terms of how corporates think about this is, on an aggregate picture, the payroll piece has, for EMEA companies, been not such a big pain point where they focused first. They had, in Europe, you have to grow, you have to internationalize really early on, which means maybe acquiring businesses, and which results in a relatively federated payroll system, multiple countries, even multiple systems per countries maybe, or whatever. So it is a bit of a nightmare that no one really wants to touch. But we are seeing a shift in that. Companies are now thinking about, these things actually need to work better together. And I think this is also an important trend to mention, maybe, as you are kind of thinking about how do you evolve your own payroll processes and technology stack, and maybe in 1 year, 2 year, 3 years kind of time frame, what are the strategic changes you want to be making, right? So I think there is also the opportunity to benchmark yourselves a little bit with what others are doing out there as well.
And there can be some really quick wins, can't there? I think, the way that I'm thinking about the UK and the fact that any new starter will need to fill out their HMRC new starter form, which is a kind of, often a bit worked in many businesses where that's a pen and paper job. You sit down and fill it out, but it doesn't have to be that way. And actually, that information that we use on our onboarding flow for all of our new bobbers that join is captured digitally, and it's captured as part of the onboarding flow, because we know that if we don't do that, then it will come back as a missing piece of information later on down the line. So it's brilliant to see some of the questions that are coming through, also some of the comments. Some of the comments you're bringing up are specific to HiBob product related questions. So not the main focus that we're going to be picking up today. So my role on our people and culture team is really looking at payroll as an actual process itself. But do feel free to put those questions in, because we can see that they've been asked, and if we don't address them on this actual webinar, if you're an existing customer of ours, then we'll be able to follow up specifically with anything that you're asking there. So but we're going to be really focusing on some of the bigger themes that we're seeing across the payroll, challenges and themes around the future that we see in the payroll space right now. But yeah, as I say, don't let that hold you back in asking these questions, because we'll be able to follow up with you afterwards as well. One of the things I'd love to touch on now, is we've spent a little bit of time looking at the challenges that we see. I'm representative of the HR side of the fence. I work very closely with our payroll team. They sit in finance. That's one example of some of the different collaborations that have to take place to really make this work. And when Sven, I'd love to get your perspective on that. Each of those collaborations, each of those teams interacting with one another in the process, is either an opportunity to get it really smooth and right, or it's an opportunity to have some kind of breakdown in the share of information or breakdown in ways of working. What do you see here? What's not working, actually? Let's start with that. When you think about these interfaces between HR, payroll, and finance in the traditional processes, what are some of the points?
Yeah, so ultimately, overall, there was a survey recently by the Global Payroll Association that found that 25% of UK employees have received at least one incorrect, pay slip or pay statement or whatever. So this is often blamed on human error, but most often the real issue is in the underpinning technology ecosystem. You have alluded to multiple departments having to work on this process: finance, HR, employees, managers, in operations as well. So certainly this routing it in this batch process is definitely making us over-reliant on these payroll windows, and a lot of manual data things where you have to have a lot of communication, where things can go wrong. Somebody is sick. All sorts of things can go wrong. So getting people to work on the same piece of information, on the same data, actually is really quite important to resolve some of the issues. I'm obviously aware that finance and HR have different roles. Like you said, HR is probably also more concerned around, the emotional, the experiential consequences that certain decisions on pay have on employees, whereas finance is obviously more focused on budget control, making sure that everything is like according to the financial plan. So there's a bit of a control loop that might be necessary, right? But certainly sometimes it feels there's too many Excel files being sent back and forth. So getting those things, as I said, into workflows that run digitally, where HR and finance are actors in the process, actually helps. A lot of the promotions, salary increases, bonus payments, those kind of things to be communicated to those departments. And then, things sit in emails oftentimes. There's some systems also have a possibility to leave some notes in the actual data sets in the system, so that actually my colleague, your colleague, their colleagues can also, with appropriate permissions, obviously, access the same information and work together as a true team, right? So I think this is an important piece to think about when you rethink how the payroll should work, how you also support this from the systems side, and then certainly mapping out those workflows between the departments and thinking about how those can, be improved or done a bit more efficiently, maybe in some places, is also quite important.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm thinking as you're speaking about the reality of what my team goes through. We're in that second half of the month, and there is often a kind of back and forth to validate, to check. A lot of that is a whole email chain.
Duplicate work, basically, probably.
A whole email chain back and forth. And as you say, that kind of constant conversation that's required because people don't have access to the same source of truth. It's a friction point I can really relate to. Simon, you're working with some of our customers on maybe how to do things differently. I'd love to see, particularly when it comes to this collaboration, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what you've seen there. Do you see better versions of these collaborations? And if so, paint the utopian picture for us.
Certainly. So I guess data silos are, like as Sven said, they're very, very common in that respect there, which can have some real practical challenges as well. To expand on that, first of all, I think when we look at finance involvement, which I guess commonly can in the UK sort of be the owner of payroll in that way. It's not just the processing they need to do in the visibility, but not having sort of forecastability of the payroll as well, because real challenges at the same time. I've worked with customers before who perhaps have some cash flow constraints there, and making sure they have visibility of how much to pay people is a real thing they need to have that visibility on there, because it's not just paying them, the actual process there, it being accurate, is make sure the cash flow is there to make the payment as well. So it can be real sort of damaging to not have the right visibility controls and to break down these silos that Sven alluded to. I think there's many ways to look at it there with I guess looking now into automation tools there. I mentioned before that that the HCM system tends to be the source of truth in there, and rather than pushing things out in that way is probably looking at your system today and does it allow for things like permission-based controls there, so everyone's actually looking at the same source of truth in that way. Of course, you don't want to often open up your HR platform to everyone in finance or payroll, because in there you may have some sensitive data about employees there, their characteristics are in there, of course, and maybe got information about grievances, disciplinaries, sickness details. So you can't open up and say, have access like a HR admin may. But does your platform, your system allow for that permission-based controls where you can create a profile just for those sort of payroll or finance people, so they can almost sort of self-serve or be notified, have in those approvals in the system that they are actually part of that process. It's not relying then on someone being in the office, someone remembering to send it through on an email, in a report, or otherwise, but having them have the same, not the same visibility, but the right visibility to the source information, to really pull that data through and have it involved. I'd also look at those key approvals as well. We mentioned before about, I guess, payroll cutoffs. And Sven, you mentioned a great thing about employee self-service as well. Can employees self-serve their changes in the platform, or can managers approve those pieces as well in there? But there's also a practical thing to think about as well, is if I'm changing my bank details, if the payment's already being processed there, we're going to my old account and I've changed, I could then not be paid, not through any error there, but I, as an employee, am not aware of the cutoff myself. Maybe my manager knows, maybe HR know, but I'm going to, let's say today on the 20th, change my bank details. The file's been run, the cutoff's been done there. It's waiting to be sort of processed by backs in there. So it's probably quite wide ranging, but what you want to sort of look at is, does your sort of system allow you to have the right controls in place for access, the right people in there, the right automations, the right validations against those, the right approvals to make sure people are aware of the information, and generally the right communications to the business so they're aware of some of the constraints there. Or can you even shut down certain changes in a time frame, or build approvals that then make sure it's not impacting these things? So again, if I do change my bank account today, what's the impact today? Can I be paid into my account today there? Or do I need to be mindful that actually I should keep my other account open to make sure I'm paid at the end of this month?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm again thinking about some of the changes that my own team have made in the way that we work with our dedicated payroll team. First of all, it's that awareness, and I'm sure that we've got dedicated payroll professionals here on the call. There's so much more than just processing that goes on there. A lot of validation, a lot of QA, a lot of asking the right questions to check for errors, and I think that's hugely value add. So empowering that profile to have access to check some of these things themselves, like we might say that someone in the summary that someone's departing the business, but if they can't go and do a check and balance against that, what was the termination reason? Let's validate the dates. Is it in the HCM? Then they're not doing their jobs properly. And if they've got access to that information themselves without having to come through the HR team, then we see that can make some difference. Couple of questions have come up that I do want to make a quick reference to. So there was is there a plan to have a HiBob payroll as a product, a bit like Bob Talent? So in the UK, we do now have a UK payroll product. Simon's working, we're going to come on to that in just a minute, actually, with customers in that area. And we actually had a similar question from John on the Q&A around there being adverts for UK payroll for Bob. Is this correct? And why is it not showing up on the HMRC recognized software list? We'll check that on the HMRC side. We're really proud to say that our Bob Pay product is part of a UK acquisition that we made from a company previously Pento, and they've been processing payrolls for quite some time. So that's one thing we should maybe check with the HMRC to see if that name has been updated.
So I can say, Toby, we've made the request, it's being processed there. So as you said, it was Pento before. So if you're searching, it'll be under Pento right now. But I'll just say we have raised the right forms and requests there, and hopefully it'll be updated soon to reflect HiBob's UK payroll.
Thank you, Simon. And look, I'm going to keep us moving in the conversation. Let's talk a little bit about, maybe if you are considering switching your payroll provider. We know that this is a big decision. The thought of changing something, even if it's a challenge, is a massive massive headache when you think about ultimately this is ensuring that money ends up in people's bank accounts when it's meant to. So, how do you build that business case for leadership? I'm going to ask a bit of a combined question, Simon, because I'm sure you'll probably talk overall to the story, but, how do you build a business case to switch payroll provider? How do you actually do it? How long does it take? What do you have to do? These are all the daunting questions. And Sven, also, please feel free to chip in on this as well. But I'll start with
sure.
Come to you.
Yeah, no, of course, happy to. So it's probably more thinking of payroll less as just a back office sort of function and process there, but as a real sort of strategic importance to the business, as well as what's not working today, and what can you do about it, essentially, in there. We discussed some of the challenges before there, and what we see with a lot of sort of, I guess, our customers today is as you go through this transformation process, and maybe implementing Bob as part of that process as well, they're looking then at sort of the future of that, as well as how they optimize this payroll flow as well. At the same time, to have things more real time integrated between the two there. So as with any, I guess, business cases, looking at, I guess, the current pain there, which tends to be down to manual errors. I know when I worked in payroll, you sort of hold your breath after the payroll date there, and you expect these queries to come in, and we've almost accepted this as reality there, which we really need to get move away from. That it shouldn't be the case that we get all these queries in the business. In fact, when we had minimal queries, we were always worried, why is it so quiet here? There should be more queries in the business. And I think we need to move away from this concept of there should be questions about payroll there, and actually is adding strategic value to us in that way. Of course, nowadays things like financial well-being is paramount to us. So does your payroll solution really support your wider I guess strategy and your people strategy there? Does it allow you and your employees to have that sort of, I guess, financial well-being side of things as well, where you look at the number of sort of payroll errors in there. I think there's a report a couple of years ago that said that about a third of the UK are living paycheck to paycheck, essentially. So the cost of getting it wrong is really fundamental there. That these can be sort of defaults to people's mortgage payments, other bills there, childcare costs and things. So having an incorrect payslip is really detrimental to their financial well-being. And I guess also that relationship between the employee and employer. So building that case, I really look at the current pain there. So looking at the errors and the impact to employees on that. Does it align to your strategic goals, your current solution? Look at the time being spent on the process of manual entry and sort of keying the same information to two systems that you may do today and there. Are employees happy with their decision? Can they self-serve things in payroll as well in that way? What's actually the landscape for them and their interaction with the solution? And looking, I guess, at the future then is what's the benefits going to bring to you in there as well?
So Simon, when you've worked all of that out and you've kind of sold those questions in, let's say you have decided, we are going to make the change.
Yeah.
We're going to change our payroll provider and our process. That's a daunting step. Like, what are some of the key, this is some of the stuff that you do with customers. What are some of the key things that you can do to ensure that that goes smoothly?
I think one thing that we do internally is it's not just like a lift and shift between payroll to payroll there, but we do almost like a health check of your current payroll. Actually, what we tend to find is that when we do things like parallel runs, sometimes they don't match, and it's actually because the way things set up in the current system have been incorrect there as well. So I guess it's just really spending the time to go through and validate those pieces can be key in there. But it also maybe a misconception that it has to be a long drawn out task as well there. We tend to see with our customers, we can go live within, I think 45 days to 105 days typically there. And it's very down to options we have available, which I'll maybe explain just a little further. That you can do what's called like a reconciliation run, which you basically reconcile the payroll, compare the setup in your current solution to the previous ones there. So you can be live quite quickly with a new payroll solution. Of course, if you may be more complex and want the traditional sort of view of those parallel runs, because maybe you're not confident in your data there, and you want a bit more of those. Can you almost like say health checks of validating things to go through? But I'd say that the reward and the output can be really beneficial there as well from it. So I think it's one of those that it's an investment to go through certainly in that way, but it doesn't need to be the most daunting thing where you're sort of fearful to move away from a new solution to a new solution from your current in there. That most, I say for our customers will be that detailed review, working with payroll experts who actually really know payroll. It's not just that they know the solution, but they really know payroll. All of our team are sort of members of the CIPP, which for those who may be based out of the US is the Chartered Institute of Payroll Professionals here in the UK. So they're always on top of, I guess, the latest legislation, compliance in there, and here not just to implement the solution, but really work with you to optimize how your payroll works in there. So I think partnering the right people could help transform that implementation journey.
So I think a couple of nice things for people to think about there with regards to kind of, there are ways to do it. There are experts that can guide you through it. It does take a bit of time, but it's a process that can happen. And Sven, I'm reminded of something you said at the very beginning, where you said, this is an area actually where there's a huge amount of innovation and a huge amount of opportunity. So presumably it's worthwhile thinking about making this change.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is important. Obviously, on the business case side, you will look at, the hard facts, your problem statements, your benefits, the financial impact, the ROI, those kind of things. What we find why business cases fail is often because they don't necessarily address the emotional side of it. So for one, they expect some resistance. This is a running system, it's working. Why would we change it, right? So there's some change resistance for sure, but also on the executive managerial level, they must recognize pay not just as a back office process or function, or something that is non-critical and best should be outsourced, but rather see it as a driver in today's fast-changing business landscape, right? Because there's so much innovation happening in payroll. Financial well-being, you mentioned, right? Inflation has gone up. 44% of UK employees say, there has been a significant impact on the financial situation by that. Obviously, salaries going up, businesses have to follow with increases and so on. And that certainly puts more focus on employee financial well-being. So giving employees that transparency to see what they will earn, if they, I don't know, maybe they're a support person working, on a weekend kind of thing and get some premium payment or some overtime payment or whatever, then they should be able to see what that means in pounds and pennies, right? And so this helps them. So there's a significant impact on the employee experience. And this is what, in a tight labor market, companies now consider also to help their employer value proposition and employer brand. So from that perspective, you need to probably, step up a little bit the payroll game and make it a bit more visible to the executive team, if you like, that they recognize that there has a lot of innovation has happened in payroll, and that this is actually driving a stronger employee experience, and also improves retention rates for employees quite significantly. So I think those are certainly things that I would recommend, which are mostly overlooked in business cases. Oftentimes, it's all fair. I mean, the chief finance officer wants to see all these, the ROI numbers and what will be the impact and all of that. But certainly this emotional side is also quite important.
That does resonate. I think, the reality is it is the, as I said earlier on, if we encounter an HR issue during the month, but there's also a payroll issue, the payroll issue is the most important thing that we will stop and deal with, because we cannot risk somebody, in a situation where they're waiting for money to, to live their life. And I don't think we do think about that emotional component of it. I've heard, Sven, people talk about the fact that, when you think about the pay slip, it just sort of basically has not changed. I think back to when I first started working shift work in a pub, I was given a pay slip each week with cash inside the envelope, a little brown envelope. Now I don't luckily get cash in an envelope anymore.
My grandfather got that. Yes. Yeah.
But the payslip itself is
Yeah.
digitized, but it essentially looks the same. And I think, we're getting towards the end of our discussion, but I'd love you to close us out, Sven, in terms of thinking about, just that point. You're saying we need to think bigger. It's not just an administrative process, it's an emotional process as well. What does payroll look like in 10 years' time if you had your way? Like, what's the future of payroll?
Yeah, so I think, there's multiple perspectives. One for the HR, like in HR operations, and then obviously for the employee. Let's start with the employee, maybe, since we are there, right? So, obviously this emotional moment where you have the money in the bag and can walk either home to your wife or partner or go to the next pub was an exciting times back in the 1960s or whatever. So there is a bit of that, where employees can get early access to their earned wages so that they can make some of the decisions early on. So that is something which, again, in financially more challenging times for many people, this is actually providing them maybe with some additional options, and is quite an important step. So having earlier access maybe to some of your earnings is probably one thing. Also better explanations, like I'm a student, I had a student loan, now I have to pay it back. And if I remember correctly, there's this line somewhere, if you cross that, then your deductions kick in really hard and you have to pay that back. So maybe you want to actually have pre-visibility of your payslip before you take that weekend, whatever shift or something, to actually, optimize your financial well-being there as well, right? So those kind of things make it more interactive, make it more real-time, as I said earlier. And then certainly, there are some apps nowadays where you can then, immediately put it into a savings account, into your favorite ETF, whatever kind of funds and things. So I think that actually, this is maybe not like 2 years out. This is maybe 5 years until we get there. But I think it's definitely interesting to paint that picture. And also then on the back office side, on the HR side, if you like, there will be much more automation. Maybe there is a world where you just say, hey, prepare payroll, and then a few AI agents run off and send off a lot of emails, clarify a lot of the questions for you. And then you say, hey, run payroll, and then a lot of things happen. They do all the calculations. The AI agents deal with finance, and then you just say, hey, make the payments, and all the money gets transferred, right? And obviously, maybe with approval processes in the middle. But so those kind of things, like this is maybe 10 years out, I think. But we are starting to see AI being infused, and the willingness of HR, particularly on these very administrative heavy processes, to accept an AI support or assistant or suggestions is higher, and will certainly free up a lot of your HR time to work on more
Especially in
strategic stuff, right?
yeah.
And actually then focus on the experiential side more, where you then can have those additional conversations you would have to have at this moment in time in the month, where now you normally have to focus on your payroll issues, if you like, right? So
I know
I
we've
think
got
that is,
other
I see it as a positive future. Some
yeah,
people are scared, will my job be, at risk or something? But I first of all, I would see a massive improvement in terms of, those kind of things that I mentioned.
definitely. I think we know the dealing with errors, which I think probably could be much more reliably spotted by AI intervention, takes up so much time. And as you rightly say, we'd rather be having different kinds of conversations with our employees. Equally with our employees, we'd rather that they weren't wasting time looking for errors or challenging things, but were rather able to engage in the total value of their compensation and understanding additional, more interesting elements on the payslip. Simon, what are you hearing? What do you think? Where are we in 10 years' time that we don't, what's happening then that doesn't happen now?
I think since what sort of Sven said there, really, a lot of people who don't work in payroll think that payroll is pushing a button there, and that isn't the reality today. And everyone knows, I guess, on the call, it's really not the case. It's just that simple. Hopefully, we'll get to a place that is a little more in that way. But I think at the heart of it will be a lot more, to expand on what Sven said, just employee centric in there as well. When you pay someone overtime now, they have to almost think about what is the gross to net calculation of that. What's my take home in there? So I do think that real time feed and an interactive pay slip, a lot more than just what's in there, will be sort of paramount, and we'll see a lot more common in there, I'd say. So looking at what is their actual take home by here, what helping them maybe plan or think about their retirement and savings at the same time. I'm sure most of us know what a percentage contributions are for our pensions if we're paying into those or not opted out. But what does that actually mean for me into the wider scale there, and actually helping people be a bit more in control of their finance? So I guess as an overall, I'd sort of say the future is exciting. I would say looking increasingly digital, connected, and employee centric as a general sense.
And David's just mentioned in the chat there that AI with no technical knowledge in payroll feels dangerous, and I think we would agree with that. I think, like much of AI, the specifics of how the intervention would take effect is to be determined. But I would say there are things that happen in the current processes, at least that I'm aware. I can speak from my own experience, where we do rely on manual intervention to highlight changes. Sometimes those changes also exist in data sets. And having that kind of overlay validation that says these are all the differences we see this month to last month in a bit more of a user-friendly way that I think AI can do very well, at least to draw attention to where you might have errors or where information might not have been shared, is the kind of thing we're thinking about right now. Okay, time's flown. I think we've got another question that's going to pop up on the screen just about follow-up and if you'd like to be contacted. So do please take a minute to answer that. And while you're are answering that now, please, I'm going to turn back to our panelists here and just have your one takeaway. If you'd really like our audience today to take away one thing from today's conversation, I'm going to start with you, Sven. What would you like people to take away from today?
Yeah, I think definitely look at payroll. It is an area that has seen a lot of innovation, and companies in the UK are adopting towards this new payroll paradigm: integrated, real-time, innovative, accurate, right? So those things that we kind of discussed today, I guess, are really, what you might not think of this being an area of innovation. So it is, and it is probably now 2025 is the time to look at this and kind of if you are on this old legacy thing and you have these problems, I guess it is a good moment in time to look. And there will be more innovation coming. So it is not. It is also not a one-off project. It can also be I think of it as a journey. Is probably the other thing with AI. Anyway, you will need to look at this in every other year because it is moving very fast in that space. And to David's point, yes, obviously a human in the loop is probably still what we all want here, right? Obviously, because we want actually to make sure that payments are accurate, landing everybody in everybody's bank's accounts.
And as you said earlier, Spencer, I really loved it. Actually, let's look at payroll as an emotional human process, not as an automated one too. If we can if we can take all that admin out, through better systems, then we can actually focus on the part of payroll that really matters, which is the human element of it.
Absolutely, that's a good one too.
Thank you. Simon, I'm going to let you close out with your closing remark for everyone.
Sure. I mean, really, only to sort of echo what Sven has sort of covered there. I think that we often see people who want to change other systems, like the HR system, have very sort of deep-rooted, value sort of thoughts in that, and how is it really applied to their sort of larger strategy of sort of people support and operations in there. And I think now is the time that payroll is in that sort of should be that thought process as well. There, it's not just that back office function that is simply it pays people in there, but does your current solution or way of working actually really support your wider sort of strategy there and your sort of employee value proposition that you want to hold in there? Because there's many ways today and more that we're coming certainly down the line in the industry there to really make payroll a much more strategic sort of function in that way, and less focused on the pure payment. That will remain and still be important to make sure people are paid correctly and on time, of course, but the wider pieces there about the financial well-being and pieces there of and processing with real information is available now. So just I guess now is the time to think about that and I guess be excited about payroll.
Well, I've certainly taken away a theme from both of you, which is that this is perhaps an area which for the last many decades, we might even say centuries, just hasn't really changed. But we are at a turning point, and that is now no longer the case. We're expecting to see a lot more innovation in this space. And it isn't even a case of just upgrading a system once and being done, but it's about choosing a partner and choosing your processes that will be able to evolve with the rapidly changing world around us. And that this is why it's such an exciting time to be engaging in the conversation. So big thank you to Sven and to Simon for joining me today to have this discussion. And a huge thanks to all of you and for your engagement as well in the chat and in the polls and questions. And do hope to get a chance to meet some of you in person in industry and in-person events and on other webinars. Thank you for joining. Thank you for participating. Happy paydays ahead.